Cool. All right. So I'm Jason. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. This is our third FOIA forum. I think that we've got a lot of new faces, I would think, or a lot of new avatars. So while we're not going to sort of like start from the very beginning about how to file a FOIA, I think that some of this might be a little bit repetitive. Um, but just so people can follow along. Our first two have been recorded, and if you're a member, you can go back and watch if you're interested. But I'm going to talk a little bit about a story that I published a few weeks ago. Let me share my screen.
As you're just setting that up, I will say Jason will be like leading it mostly, and I will be keeping an eye on the chat. So if and when you have any questions, just put them in the chat. I'll grab them and then we'll get to them. We'll have this as like the main thing of this FOIA forum, but this is obviously a forum for you all to ask questions as well. So please feel free to do so, and we will get to as many as we possibly can.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this story because it's a little bit different than a lot of the previous FOIA work that we've done and talked about in these forums. This is actually a FOIA. This is a story we published beginning of last week. If you haven't seen it, it is a FOIA that resulted in body camera footage and then a few emails. This is not a FOIA that I filed. Actually, it's a FOIA that a researcher filed and that I happened to see. And then I reached out to the researcher and talked to him and got permission to use it and stuff like that. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how in the FOIA world, there's a lot of like sort of building on other people's requests, and some of the like ways that you can do this and sort of the etiquette of doing so, I guess. So as I mentioned before, we use this tool called Muckrock. I file some FOIAs not using Muckrock, or sorry, like I file some directly with some of the agencies, but for the most part, I use Muckrock. And the reason that I do that is it creates this really nice sort of like database of everything that I've ever filed. And I can then kind of like go back and look through everything I've filed. And for the most part, agencies don't respond to the first request. Like sometimes you have to follow up, and Muckrock has this system where it has like automated follow-ups and stuff like that. So rather than having to keep like hundreds of FOIA requests, across different email addresses, different systems, like some you can file through email, some you have to use a portal, some you have to like do across a bunch of different things. It's like Muckrock allows you to keep track of it all in one place. And we've talked a little bit before about how after you file a FOIA, it sort of like goes under embargo, or at least you can click a button that says like, this is an embargoed request. If you see over here, it's like, this is embargoed. And then once you get the documents back, there's 30 days. And then after those 30 days, it becomes public. And what I mean by that is they have this database of all of their users' FOIAs. And so if you look here, this is sort of like the list of all of Muckrock's FOIAs. There's just like, there's thousands. There's 37,000 FOIAs that have been completed under Muckrock that are available that you can sort of check out.
This is done by other users, like not Muckrock as an entity. This is just like you or anybody else who in the audience signs up. This is their FOIAs. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like mine ultimately end up in here. Joseph's end up in here at some point. You can permanently embargo things, which is like means they will never show up here. But I think sort of like in the interest of sharing, it's like once we publish our stories, we take the embargo off and then it's like anyone can see those documents. And I think more importantly, you can see the request itself. So
Yeah.
I haven't gotten a whole lot back yet, but it's like this one is still under embargo. I wrote an article about it. I'm still trying to get some documents, but it's like once this goes off of embargo, you'll be able to come in here and see kind of exactly the wording that I use to file requests. And I change it for every one, but the general template stays the same. So it's like when you file a new request on Muckrock, you have this. It's just like a blank thing, and you need to call it something. So like you could call it book bans, and then this one was in Kootenai County. So Kootenai County Sheriff, it's already in there, which is nice. It's like anytime anyone files a FOIA with any agency in the United States, it gets added to this database. So it's like Kootenai County Sheriff, and then it's there. If it's not there, I'm trying to think of something, but like let's say like Kootenai County Parks and Recreation. I don't know if that agency exists, but I suspect that it probably does. You like click add, and then it's there, and it says pending, and that means like a Muckrock staffer will go and add this to the database sort of after the fact.
Yeah, and Muckrock, the organization, goes out and then finds that email address or the portal or whatever, so you don't have to do it. Because honestly, like, not half the work, but a lot of the work is just finding where to send the flipping FOIA to, and Muckrock helps with that, yeah.
Right. So this is sort of like my general template. It's like I will change this up, but I take kind of like this for no matter what I'm doing, and then I'll put it in here, and I will let me see, because there, Joseph, do you have any that you need to file right now?
I will scroll through our Slack and have a
Yeah,
look.
if you could dump me like in the chat something so that I don't have to
Yeah, sure.
go into our Slack. But and in any case, I'd sort of like alter the details. I usually try to prove that what I'm filing is actually a thing. So I will like dump a link to a public article that says like, hey, you should have records about this thing. And then I will like tweak this. So I'm looking for like communications, memos, emails, letters, a few others. Okay, let's see what this is.
This was a story. I haven't read the full story yet. I haven't had time, but it's about how you're not insane. The jalapeno has got less spicy, and it's related to the invention of Texas A&M University. And again, I haven't read the whole thing, but why don't we FOIA for emails just related to it or something like that? Because you can generally FOIA a lot of universities. Maybe they're in there, maybe they're not, but we'll see.
Texas A&M is a public university, so if you type it in here,
yeah, rare W.
So it's in here, Texas A&M jalapeno controversy. This title is just like for myself. It doesn't.
I think that Muckrock sometimes puts that on the request, because I've had ones back from the FBI and it's included bits of what I put, and like sometimes I can be a bit flippant in my title. So I mean, it doesn't matter there, but just bear that in mind if you are doing something sensitive.
Right. Okay.
like don't like don't be angry at them in your title.
Yeah. So here is the here's like how I approach it, and normally I would probably do slightly more research, but in the interest of just like showing people how I do it, it's like here's a great article by Brian Reinhart in Dallas Magazine, and it's about people at Texas A&M University making jalapenos less spicy. So it's called the TAM 1 and TAM 2, which I guess would be Texas A&M jalapenos. So I'm going to go back here and say, I'm requesting access to documents and records pertaining to Texas A&M's development of the TAM 1 and TAM 2 there we go. Jalapeno.
I would this is super pedantic, but I think it's important for FOIAs. Is that you put 1 and 2 as in the digit. I think they did it the Roman numeral in the article, right?
Right. Okay.
So
That's a good point.
and look, I'm a very pedantic person, but FOIAs are even more pedantic somehow. So maybe it wouldn't matter here because it's not part of the actual request, but like you have to be so specific in your language sometimes. Yeah, so maybe that'd be better.
So then like it's basically like here's what I'm looking for, and then I like to put something like here's how I know that this is real. So recent reports show that Texas A&M University worked on these jalapenos. This like doesn't super matter. It's just like here's a link. Click if you're not sure what I'm talking about, because often FOIA officers will say, I'm not sure what you're talking about. I will say like, here you go. It's written about in this article, click through and look. So specifically, I'm interested in any communications memos, emails, or letters about mentioning or pertaining to the development of the TAM 1 and / or TAM 2 jalapeno.
Bro, Roman numerals.
Hold on. Please search for TAM 1,
Oh.
TAM 2, TAM I,
Uh-huh.
and TAM 2. That way you can sort of catch all of it. I usually try to have some sort of like either misspelling, because you'd be surprised how often things are misspelled in official documents, things like that. And then always ask for the attachments, any photos or media about the jalapenos. So we're talking about jalapenos, so like let's say any like taste testing notes, that could be your thing. I mean, FOIA is a lot of like guessing often. So let's say any taste testing notes about TAM 1 and TAM 2. This article is about how like there's a lobbying organization involved, I believe. So let's see, Tim. Okay, it doesn't name any like jalapeno lobby here.
Big jalapeno.
Yeah, big jalapeno. But I would probably, if I were spending a lot of time on this, I would research like what the agricultural lobby for hot peppers are, which I bet you there is one. And then I would add that, like any contracts between that organization and Texas A&M, any like scientific reports about TAM 1 and TAM 2. And then these don't seem very relevant to me, so I'm going to cut them. And then for the most part, you want to try to have a time limit on it. I used to not file with a time limit, and I would have a lot lower success rate, because very often they'll say, well, we have 9,000 emails about TAM 1. It's going to cost you thousands of dollars to get this. This happened in 1983. So I'm going to say for all of these, please search between like Jan 1, 1982 and Jan 1, 1990. I don't know. This is just a guess. I don't think that this is going to be super successful, because this happened way back in 1983, and a lot of they're supposed to have records, but they may not.
Like, who knows? Beatmaster says add tam free for good measure, and I think, yeah, fuck it, why not? You know?
That's actually a great point,
Yeah.
because maybe they're
Well, they have a whole arsenal, you know?
well, maybe they're developing new ones.
Yeah, exactly. Do you have advice about how to get them to exclude duplicate emails? Sorry, you go ahead, Jason. I'm still.
Well, so what I was gonna say is that I'm sorry, this is a little bit repetitive from some of our first ones, but for people who didn't know, this is sort of like how Muckrock works. It's like what the system is. Muckrock is a nonprofit. We pay them, I think, $100 a month for 50 requests a month. Yeah, so it's the beginning of the month, so we've only filed one FOIA so far this month. And now we filed two.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, so submitted it, they go and do it, and then it goes into my little system here. They're processing it. It will soon say awaiting acknowledgement, which is where, once it says awaiting response, that's like when you've heard back from them, like, hey, we are processing this. So,
if you're done with that FOIA, could I answer a couple of questions?
yes.
Sure.
Yes.
So to go back a little bit, I think Dan was asking, whether Muckrock is free or not. Somebody pasted the finance page in the chat. It is, I think, free to use, generally for users, but you don't get like the embargo features and that sort of thing. Maybe someone from Muckrock who may be in the chat can correct me if I'm wrong. We can look at the link, but we do have a plan for it, and you get 50 requests a month, that sort of thing, as you just saw. I would just personally recommend, if there is the free tier, just go and just start filing FOIAs. Like, don't worry about it. It's like exercise. It's like a muscle. You really have to train it. So like, just go wild and just start doing stuff. And if you actually get value out of it and you want to do more, then think about paying, and like the benefits you get from paying are definitely great, but just start doing it would be my advice. Jason, here was one question I think from Dan as well. What if the FOIA relates to R&D a university is doing on behalf of a government body or private business? What criteria would have to be fulfilled for them to refuse the FOIA? One that just comes to mind would be like a trade secrets one, or maybe it would be law enforcement techniques. If a university develops some sort of IP address tracing technology or child exploitation hunting software or anything like that, right? That could come up. It really depends on the individual item. Jason, any thoughts?
Yeah, I actually, we're among friends and supporters here, so I'm going to show you an example of that, actually. I haven't written this article yet, and I'm going to write it in the next few days, so please don't steal. It is still embargoed, but Flock study. So Flock is an automated license plate reader company, like a surveillance company, and a few weeks ago, they put out this new study. Oops. They put out this new study that finds that flock safety is instrumental in solving 10% of reported crime in the U.S. And here's the study, and it was done by the University of Texas at Tyler, which is a public university, and let's see. Okay, that did work. So here's the study. This is the study. And if you look at it, the authors are someone who works at Flock and then two researchers at two different universities. And the study is here. And Flock's name is on the study. And Flock has sort of been parroting all over the place that they reduce crime to a great degree. But if you read this study, which we're not going to read right now, it doesn't say what cities they tested this in, what towns they tested this in, sort of like how the study worked, how the funding worked, so on and so forth. And because Texas, University of Texas at Tyler is a public university. I went and filed a FOIA. Communication between Flock and Richard Helfers, who is the person who did the study at this university. I found his email address and put it in there, and then I asked for any contracts. And what I got back is a bunch of emails,
That's a good site.
which
When
is
it,
nice.
when it says see more files, you're like, oh, okay, this is a good one.
So there's all these files, and I haven't read all of them yet. I've looked at most of them, but I haven't looked at all of them. But the one thing that I did see was this Kebler brief to AG, which I'll pull up. Whoa, I don't know why this opened in this extension, but anyways. So what this is that Texas has a very weird public information records law, and it's a really like kind of helpful one because anytime that an agency in Texas wants to redact a bunch of information, they have to write a letter to the state attorney general saying, here's why we want to redact information and how and why we're going to do it. And I looked at this earlier, and it's a bunch of like laws and stuff. Like this is, I will do more research on specifically what they're arguing, but what they're saying is basically like, we want to redact information. We don't want to fully respond to this. And you'll notice this is CC'd to Flock. Like, this is a public records request from me to an agency in Texas. And they are essentially like asking Flock for their feedback on what can and cannot be released, which is
It's wild.
frankly like a super fucked up provision in a lot of FOIA laws where like the companies that have public contracts with public taxpayer funded organizations have some level of ability to say, don't release this information. So
I think it's for all companies, right? Like if there's just some sort of transactional relationship, and it doesn't matter whether it's somebody like selling pencils to the state or surveillance technology. I mean, they're not going to redact the shit about pencils, right? But I think it applies to just businesses.
right. So the interesting thing here is one, the third party has not agreed to the release of the information at issue. So that sort of gets to the main question here is like, this is why they're trying not to release it. And they're saying that it could reveal company trade secrets, financial and commercial competitive information, including pricing structure and blah, blah, blah. And I did go through all of these emails, and it's like, they didn't give me what I wanted. They did not give me like a list of cities and states that were subject to this. Like essentially Flock is asserting, I believe, through this agency that this publicly funded study, like we can't even know what cities they are working in. They're also saying like they didn't give me the contract, so we don't know how much Flock paid to have this study made. And so I will be writing an article about sort of like this because I think it's shady, to say the least. But to your point, very often when you're seeking stuff about companies, you will hit some level of resistance, and you can either like take whatever they give you and be happy with it and just say like, well, I got some documents, like I'm fine with that. Or you can file an appeal. And the way that you file an appeal would be like, well, I don't know why it's not letting me file an appeal. Maybe because it's still pending AG ruling, but you can basically like file an appeal, which I actually did in the Satanic Temple thing. I wrote this whole other thing. And then you file it, and then they made a determination, and they said like, here's why we redacted all the information. And then I can either decide to keep fighting that, I can decide to sue them, I can decide to give up. It's kind of like, how far do you want to take any given request?
That's good. Let me blast through a couple more of these questions. I'll try to do them rapid fire just because I do want to get as many as possible. So, one from Elizabeth here. How common is it for these attempts to incur fees? Has it ever thwart your investigations? Very common. Does it thwart it? Yes, sometimes because we simply just don't have the money to go and pay for that. The way you avoid that is apart from somehow magically getting money, you narrow your request, and that's like what Jason said with the date range and that sort of thing, being super specific about the requested records. If they say, hey, this is going to cost a ton, reply and say, do you have any advice to make this less burdensome on the agency? That's the term I use. Maybe you have a phone call with them, some of them like to do that, and then you find a way to make it cheaper. And then you ask, you add, I don't know if you're independent or not. We're very, very independent, and we're primarily funded by people like you, so I appreciate it. And then they add, if you have to issue a correction because you haven't been specific enough yet, does that stack? That's a little tricky. It sort of depends at what stage they're processing it. If you've immediately filed it, you could probably send a follow-up pretty quick, but they don't like it when you tack stuff on, especially the federal agencies. Cody asked, do you have advice about how to get them to exclude duplicate emails? Honestly, no, I've never actually tried that, but that would be an interesting thing. You could ask, please don't include duplicates, but I'm a little worried that they would get like over the top with it and like, you know, start removing stuff. So I would do that at your own risk, or you'll just have to go through all the emails, I suppose.
I have done that, and I mean to start doing it in some cases, but I frankly have been forgetting. But it is frustrating when you get 800 pages of documents and 600. It's like 3 emails sent to like 800 different people, and it just like is the same email repeated. That's very common.
Yeah.
So it's a good question.
Yeah, I get that as well. Are there any particular states you filed with notably low fees? I can't think of any. Jason, I don't keep that sort of granularity in my head, to be honest.
Yeah, I like I just spray and pray. So I file a bunch, and then whatever they say back, that's kind of like when I learn about any given state's policies. Florida in particular is very expensive. I wrote an article about that right after we started. There's no fee waivers in Florida. And a fee waiver is when you sort of say like, hey, I am a journalist. Or if you're not a journalist, you can say, hey, I'm doing this in the interest of public transparency and sort of because I just want to get this out there. Something like 90% of all FOIAs are filed by corporations seeking like research and stuff like that. So if you're just like an individual person, you can sometimes get a fee waiver. But in Florida, for example, they don't have that, which is interesting because Florida people often say like Florida has really good public records laws. And that's kind of true because it has an expansive law about like how many records you can get. And usually the turnaround time is pretty quick in Florida. But in practice, the fees I've found in Florida are like really expensive very often. And that can be used as a burden. So yeah, I don't know of any that have really low fees, but I do know of some, like I've had some cases where I've gotten like a very thorough and complicated response and not paid any fees from some random Parks and Recreation department in Washington or something. It's more of a like agency by agency thing versus state by state. It's kind of like a roll of the dice as to like which FOIA officer you get.
Yeah. Let me just do 3 more and then we'll move on. Do you have a methodology for organizing the materials you get back? We discussed this in more detail in an earlier one. I'm going to make a dedicated page with the previous FOIA forums to make this just easier with maybe a summary of what's in each. So maybe go back and watch that one. I would say that I do it in Google Docs, and I think Jason does it in a text file. We're pretty chaotic in that, but I just read every page and take notes. But I'll point you to an earlier one for more specifics. And then in relation to the TAM requests that we're just doing now, if you requested information on, say, TAM free, could they deny information based on the fact it's commercially sensitive and not yet released? Yeah, I could see that. I could see that happening. Another one that often comes up is like legally legally privileged communications. Like, oh, this was a communication between our lawyer. They're deliberating about stuff, so we're not going to give it to you. And then last one I'll do for the moment. Can I access other people's FOIA requests and responses? Should I be looking to see what searches have already been done first? That's a great thing, and that's sort of what Jason meant at the top, is that not even necessarily to see, oh man, somebody's done it, so I shouldn't. It's more to get inspiration, to get ideas. We try to be very polite about it. You know, if we find somebody's FOIA and we would like to use the records, we don't just take them. You know, we reach out to them and that sort of thing. But you should absolutely read other people's language. I've read the language of like ones from the ACLU, and they're obviously very, very good at this. So definitely look at others. There's more questions, but I'll hold for a minute so you can carry on talking, Jason.
Yeah. Some of these questions I do want to get to, but I think I'll answer a couple of them in the process of talking about this.
Yeah.
So I was showing you Muckrock has like these all requests. These are only requests that have been filed by Muckrock users. And I saw Michael Morrissey, who is the executive director of Muckrock, I believe, the boss of Muckrock, is in the chat. So thank you for being here. I believe Muckrock is like a huge percentage of all FOIA requests in the US just because it's such a great tool. But there are tons of people who file FOIA requests and don't use Muckrock. And some agencies have what's called a FOIA reading room. And I'm just using the FBI's right now, but it's like you can go in and these are like all of the not all, but these are some of the documents that the FBI has released relating to sort of like other FOIAs. Los Angeles Records Center. Los Angeles has like a really good one, which I don't know how to get to actually. But let me find one I filed for LA. So they use like every agency uses a different thing, and LA makes all of its records public at some point, so you can see like the entirety of all of the like requests, and then the back and forth, and then the actual documents if you're able to find that page. And a lot of different states and cities have this, and that actually makes it a little bit complicated if you get like a super hot document back, like something you really want. There are people that sometimes sit in that, and I've gotten scooped before on something that I've filed because I didn't write about it right away and someone had seen it on the public like ledger or whatever.
So it could be embargoed in Muckrock, but it might not be embargoed elsewhere, basically.
Yeah, and you definitely like can't embargo it with the actual government. If the government chooses to release it on their page, then it's a free for all. That said, it's like there's not that many people checking these pages very often, so for the most part, it's fine. So what I do very often when I don't know what to FOIA, when I'm thinking like, hey, what should I FOIA? I go to this recently completed requests, and I'm like, oh, that's a really good request. Like maybe I'll do something similar about either the same company or a different company in a different city or state or whatever. And that's what happened with this Kootenai County Sheriff's Book story that led to this body camera footage. Is I was scrolling through and I saw this guy, Adam Steinbaugh, was filing tons and tons of really good FOIAs all over the country about book banning, which is something that I was really interested in and that I really wanted to do an article about at some point. And I saw this. I mean, we can look at Adams. He works for this organization called FIRE, which is a like a free speech organization. And I talked to him, and he's basically like, I just do this in my free time. Like, I just file a bunch of FOIAs because I'm interested. So he has like a lot of kind of fun ones, but he's done a lot about book banning. So here's one in Massachusetts that I mentioned in the article. this is like a book banning over the book Genderqueer. There was a police investigation into this book in a school library, which is nuts. And he got back like all these documents about sort of the investigation. I'm not sure which of these is notable, but when I saw this one, I went and looked, and this you can't see, and I'm not going to click it because it's 6 gigabytes large, but it's like if you see at the bottom here, it's an MP4 file, and it's that body camera footage that I ultimately wrote about. So he was able to get that. I called him up. I like emailed him and said, "Hey, I'm very interested in writing about this. Like, are you going to write about it? Like, are you going to do anything with these?" Like, maybe he was doing a research report. Maybe he was a journalist and he was doing something. Like, I didn't want to steal it because it was his idea. And he was like, "No, I just do this in my free time. It's something I care about. Like, go for it." So after he said that, it's like, okay, well, I mention him and quote him in this article, but they're basically mine. They're anyone's now. So to do this story, like I thought that the body camera footage was very interesting, but it was actually like a case where turning this into an article was kind of complicated because it was body camera footage, but there like wasn't additional context because the sheriff involved like didn't write a report. All of the emails were kind of like about nothing. They were just like constituents yelling at him, which was kind of funny, but it wasn't really like it didn't explain why he was there. And so what I did was I went to the like the library's website, the Hayden Library, the Community Library Network. And this is sort of like the public library system in this county in Idaho. And what I learned was that this organization that the sheriff meets with at the library had been showing up to the public meetings of the Hayden Library for like a year at that point. So what I did was I went to the board of trustees. I like clicked around on this website for a really long time. And I found that they have agenda, minutes, and reports. So essentially they have like a bi-monthly meeting or like a meeting every now and then. And they have on their website the agenda, which is, it looks like this. It's like, here's what we're doing. Here's what we're talking about. And then they have what's called a packet. And these are like all of the documents that, it's like all of the proposed rules, like research reports, blah, 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 that go into any given meeting. So there's very often like really interesting documents here. And then they also had recording, which is very nice. So here we have this meeting. We're not going to watch it, but what I have learned is that like one of the very good uses of AI is for transcribing things. And on YouTube specifically, there's a transcript feature. And so to do sort of like the additional reporting about like what the hell happened here, like why did this happen? Like there's this kind of like disembodied body camera footage. We don't know like what's going on. I was then able to like go back through all of this stuff. This meeting is 4 hours long, and I didn't watch 4 hours of meetings, but they're meeting twice a month. So we're talking about like 30, 40, 50, 60 hours of meetings if I just wanted to watch the last 6 months. But what I was able to do was like go through Control F in the YouTube transcript and find the like point where the sheriff had gone and like grandstanded about all of this. And I was able to find like the people who were yelling about it. And then I was able to research them and sort of figure out like what they were doing. And then I did some additional like outreach and interviews with the different people involved. And that's more work than a lot of FOIA stories. It's like very often you get a bunch of documents and it's like, here's a contract, and you look at the contract and then you reach out for comment and you write about the contract if it's like a surveillance contract or something like that. But
Wow, you're
in
calling me
this
out.
case, sorry.
That's all I do.
Yeah. So anyways, it's like that's kind of like how I took that story from here's body camera footage to like here's a very long story explaining a bunch of background. And I was then able to find this like speech that the woman he was meeting with had given saying that libraries were like Marxist plots and so on and so forth. I know I sort of like sped through that, but I guess in my mind, FOIA and like public meetings, like city council meetings, library board meetings, parks and recreation zoning meetings, things like this, they like go hand in hand, and one can sort of like influence the other. So FOIA documents can sort of be a map that will be like, oh, they were talking about this on the March 16th, 2023 meeting. And then you can kind of like go and find that meeting and you can look at it and see like, oh, here's the crazy part where they're all yelling at each other. Or you can watch a meeting and, you know, often pull up some of these documents that I was talking about, the like these. And this is just a random one I pulled up. We should stage these FOIA forms more so that I'm not doing it in real time, so that it's like, but this is how I work. It's like very real time. Like, oh, here's what we're seeing. Blah blah blah. You can often find like the names of documents to then go and FOIA. So I don't know. I don't know if I'm gonna find one in here, but you could possibly be like form 8375 filed or like mentioned in this agenda, like give me that, because not every city is going to have this sort of very nice agenda and packet and recording and so on and so forth. But that's sort of like how that story happened, and it wasn't my FOIA, but then there was like additional reporting around it that led to the story.
That reminds me of, you know, when you say you go through maybe these meeting notes or whatever and it references a document and you then FOIA that. That's pretty similar to what we sometimes do with Office of the Inspector Generals, right? Which are oversight bodies of various components of the US government. You know, you'll have one for DHS, you'll have one for FBI or DOJ or whatever, right? And you'll go through, and there's often tables or lists of just these Inspector General reports, and they don't always publish the full reports. So you go and it's like, maybe there's the title or something, and it sounds interesting because, I don't know, employee disciplined for spying on spouse. I just made that up, but like something along those lines, right? You then do a FOIA for that. So even if you don't get the documents you initially wanted, you can pivot off them and then do other things, and that's pretty common as well.
Yeah. Should we do another round of questions?
Yes. Okay. So just to get back to the list in broadly chronological order, after an initial response, you'll learn that you want some more documents. Do you just amend the first request, or do you have to file a second one? You have to file a second one, basically. Like if they've completed the request, they've given you documents, even if they're doing, sometimes what they do is like a staggered release where they're like, oh, there's so many documents, we're going to give you them piecemeal. Yeah, they'll ask you basically to submit a second one, which is annoying because this all takes time. But yeah, you have to do that. Can a non-profit org be FOIA'd? Jason, I feel like you've answered that one before and I can't remember. It really depends on the non-profit, right?
It needs to be a government entity. You can FOIA a nonprofit's dealings with a government. Like if it interacts with the state or local or federal government in some way, that's basically like how you like FOIA a company. You can't file a FOIA with a company, but you can file a FOIA with the police department to get their emails between a company or a presentation that a company is giving to a police department, but you can't FOIA a nonprofit. What you can do is nonprofits have to file different financial disclosure records, and you can go and pull those. I am not good at this. Like, I don't know how to do it, actually. Tim Marchman back at Motherboard was really, really good at this, pulling like nonprofit records from different, from the government sites and then sort of learning what they were up to. And, many nonprofits are good, but many nonprofits are also like weird lobbying arms of huge companies that are technically a nonprofit, but are not actually, or they're just like political action committees and things like that. So those can be really good. I'm kind of blanking on the name of the form that you want to look for, but that's what you can do with nonprofits, but you can't say like, give us your internal emails, essentially.
I think there's that ProPublica database that you could search.
Yeah. So ProPublica nonprofit. So this is a good one. And then there's Open Secrets is another one. Open Secrets is more like lobbying, I believe, but it's also pretty good. It has a database for, political ads, dark money, 527s. You can like look up lobbying spend. And then I believe you can like pull some of the documents from here, but I'm not sure. It's been a while since I've used Open Secrets, but both Open Secrets and ProPublica have good ones. But then you can also pull from like the government sites too.
Yeah. As far as litigation steps, do you have a retainer on a lawyer, or oftentimes reach out to interested organizations like the EFF or similar, or simply oftentimes not worth it to go far on most requests? We've sued once, right? And it was in the UK, and it was a long time ago, under Motherboard, where we used to work, technology section of Vice. We made some headway and had some obstacles as well, but it's very expensive and it's very, very time consuming. Jason Leopold, who's now at Bloomberg, right? That's his whole thing, along with a lawyer that he works with. They do lawsuits. That is outside of our financial scope, basically, at this point. We have a lawyer on retainer, but I don't think they're a FOIA expert. But, if the opportunity came up, maybe we would do, but it isn't worth it for us, really, personally, I think. If I were based in Canada and wanted to file a FOIA regarding US-based company, would I be able to do that? And if so, use Muckrock? I think so, yes. And worst case, you could do it through a proxy, which I think someone said in the chat, right? Can you get in trouble for doing this stuff legally or financially? Like if you ask for something super wide or broad, or something that's commercially or security sensitive, can you walk away? Is there any legal obligation on your end? No, you can't get in trouble. I mean, maybe they give you the documents beforehand, and it's like you agreed to pay. Well, that's not a great move on your part, but I think that's pretty rare, at least in my experience. Requesting sensitive stuff, no. The only way they could get tricky is that it sort of relates to another question, which I'll answer now, which is I assume journalists have in the past asked sources or contacts at the entity they're interested in for information to help FOIAs, like internal procedure documents, names, that sort of thing. Yes, I've personally done that, and you have to be very, very careful, because the FOIA is going to come in and going to be like, well, how the hell does the journalist know about this code name or something like that? I won't get super specific, but like I learned the code name of like a piece of spyware that a government entity was using, and I did a FOIA for that. Nobody got in trouble. It was all good, but that was definitely something in my mind of, is this too on the nose for me to request? Turned out fine. but that's something you have to pay attention to. So you're not going to get in trouble, but if you're a journalist, you do have to be careful, because this is, you're sending it right into the lion's den potentially, right? And then it could also become public as well. Is there anything similar to this for the UK?
Sorry, a little
Yeah.
bit more on that. There have been cases where journalists have gotten in trouble for publishing FOIA documents,
Yep.
which is, I'm not aware of like any journalists like losing after that, but some states have like gone super wacky and have like tried to hold a journalist liable for publishing documents that they themselves gave to the journalist, like a state then gave to them. And for the most part, anything that the government gives you is a public document and you can publish it. And it's also like, you don't have to redact stuff. Like if they give you documents and they fucked up the redactions, that is like their problem, more or less. And there have been cases where redactions have been messed up, and we've gotten them, and it's like, well, thank you for not redacting that. That was really nice. There are cases where when we publish a story, though, we redact the documents further. And the reason for that will be like the names and like addresses of random local government employees will sometimes be included in a document or something like that. And it's like, there's no public interest in you knowing Jane Smith's address in the Iowa Parks Department. Like that's not something that we feel comfortable opening them up to harassment by publishing something like that. So we will sometimes take an extra step to redact like personal information that was not redacted. That's different if it's like the mayor's something, like, I don't know. It depends. It really depends. And it's sort of case by case. And then the other thing I would say is that some states have tried to pass laws about something known as like a vexatious requester, where if you file too many complicated FOIAs, you get on a list. And I forget what state it was, but there was like a bill proposed a few weeks ago that would have put people on a vexatious requester list in this state, and it would have prevented them from filing FOIAs for like, you basically like get put in timeout or something like that. And I have like serious doubts whether that is constitutional. I think that it would probably get struck down if challenged, but for the most part, it's like something you're very, very unlikely to get in actual trouble filing FOIAs. These are public documents that are made using taxpayer money, and these are laws that, make these documents available to the public. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think the last question I have for the moment is, how useful is the metadata that comes off, PDFs you get from FOIA requests? I know sometimes they have a lot of data people don't expect. Definitely useful. I can't remember a specific example right now, but I've absolutely looked at like the metadata of a PDF to see like who the author was or something like that. I mean, we do that when we get leaked documents as well, right? Can't remember exactly why, but yes, they can be useful. And I'm sure if I haven't referenced it explicitly in the story, I've at least used it in some sort of context. Like, oh, this document in DHS was authored by somebody in like this unit of CPP or something like that, Customs and Border Protection. So, it might not always be useful, but, definitely worth a check. And I think, the stuff in the chat about redactions, they often fuck up, and that can be very, very useful to us. But as Jason said, you also, have to be mindful, because, I don't know, there used to be maybe earlier on in sort of FOIA journalism, and people like, oh, well, it's a public record, so it's fine. It's like, no, even if something is technically a public record, us publishing it, us republishing it is amplifying. So you have to be, and that's good because we're bringing attention to an issue or whatever, but you can also have side effects if you're not careful with what you're amplifying.
Yeah. To go back to the lawsuit question a little bit, I wanted to pull up this story about the Satanic Temple, which I was showing you that request earlier. I was really upset that I got tons and tons of redactions on that, like full pages of redactions. And I did file a an appeal, and I just got the appeal back a few days ago, and I don't like what they said regarding the appeal. Like I'm considering whether there's anything additional that we can do, and I don't think that we're gonna sue over this. Like I don't know. It is expensive. It's, you know, complicated. It's like these documents are, I would like them, but you know, you sort of have to pick your battles. But someone brought up like the EFF, and I wanted to like shout out this guy, Randy Evans, the executive director of the Iowa Freedom of Information Council. I found him while I was reporting this story. Um, a local journalist there who had written, who had filed um, a lawsuit against the Iowa governor's office a few years ago and won. Recommended that I speak to him, and oh, I was just there. What happened? Um, Most states, I don't know why this isn't coming up, but basically, like, this is a single guy. He is a lawyer. It's a nonprofit, but he is like the only person at this organization, from what I can tell. And his whole thing is like helping journalists and the public file FOIAs and get FOIAs back in the state of Iowa. And I don't think I will ever know all of the laws in all of the states. It's like every state has a slightly different law. But if you run into, here it is. Um, if you like run into a problem with a specific state, I would try to find an organization like this if it's something that you really care about, because one, he is like doing just a simply very like a critical job, like thankless thankless job, is like fighting for public records in Iowa, sort of like by himself. Um, but he was so helpful because he was sort of like explaining to me the redactions that I got back and why he thought that they weren't legal and under what grounds I could challenge them and so on and so forth. And it's like the EFF is great, the ACLU is great, these organizations are amazing, but on a state by state basis, there's often a really small uh, like organization or like one expert or like one random person who knows everything about the law and is willing to help you with it. And it's like if we did ultimately sue in Iowa, it's like we would do it probably by partnering with this person or like partnering with a local organization that like understands the law in that state. Um, so shout out to this organization. It's really cool. He was amazing. He's helped various journalists win lawsuits in different places, and yeah, they have groups like this in most states, but it's like it's not a given. It's not a government organization. He's not funded by the government. It's like it exists because this person's very passionate about public records in Iowa. So yeah.
We did have a couple of questions from before, right? Like I had a DM and I think you got an email or something.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just do one of those now because I want to make sure I don't forget. Somebody asks, would you be interested in this FOIA or have any advice? And they say, in the UK, a lot of government bodies have ICRs, that's Internet Connection Records, through RIPA, that's the surveillance law. You don't need to know about it. I'm just answering this because obviously I'm English, which means that technically, there's a agency called the Food Standards Agency. I guess it's like similar to the FDA sort of thing. In the US, and basically they want to FOIA stats on how often these capabilities were exercised per each government body, and not sure if it'd be thrown out. So to summarize that again, each agency or lots of agencies in the UK can access internet connection records. This shows what website somebody was visiting, that sort of thing. It was very controversial at the time. And they want to FOIA each agency and be like, how often did you use this? You could absolutely try that, and I encourage you to, and maybe I will as well, if you're okay with that. And I would just see a couple of issues. The first being overbroad, so you'd have to be very specific, like in time frame. You'd want to um, make sure you'd want to do your research and make sure you're hitting an agency that already is doing that capability. You try to find out how exactly those records are stored, and like you don't need to know, oh, it's stored in this format or something. It's maybe like in a government document somewhere, like in the meetings of the minutes of parliament or something. Maybe it says internet connection records will be stored for a year, or I think it's longer than that, or they'll be made available X, Y, blah. You just some sort of specificity about how it's collected and stored, and try to weave that into your request. And the reason I ask that is because you typically can't tell or ask an agency to generate new information. Like, you can't tell them, hey, could you go and like compile all this information and make it into a nice little table for me? Like, the table needs to already exist, basically. And that applies to the US as well, and that's why I'm answering it here. You're going to have a hard time asking agencies to create new records. You can only request new records. So I would go for it. You'd probably have more luck with the smaller agencies, which also applies to the US. You're going to have more luck with a local police department than you are the FBI. And that's why I barely FOIA the FBI anymore. Like, what's the point? I'm still waiting for some FOIAs from like 2017, literally, or 2018. So why bother doing that?
That's one of the reasons I like using Muckrock, is because I have FOIA requests from 8 years ago that if you are not following up regularly on, maybe they would get closed. Sometimes agencies are like, are you still interested in this? And Muckrock will automatically be like, yes, still interested. And then also it's like 8 years in journalism time can be like 10 jobs, 10 different email addresses. Like, you sort of like own your Muckrock account.
Yeah, and then Dan says, I thought there's a requirement legally to do it in a timely fashion. There is, and I think that's often where organizations like the ACLU get in and they do exercise their legal expertise, because they're like, you didn't do this in time, DHS, you have to provide the records about location data now, which ACLU then does, and in some cases they provide to me, right? And then I get to report on them. That would be like the legal, well, that would be one way you could legally do it. Another would be like if they're withholding the information and you believe that they shouldn't. The time issue can definitely be a legal way in there, but again, that's like too expensive for us personally. Jason, did you want to do your question? It's quite long. I haven't read the whole thing, so I'll let you do it.
So I'm putting it on the screen now. I will read part of it. This was a very thoughtful question from a reader who didn't want to be identified. I'm a scientist. I periodically FOIA certain government agencies to get access to particular data sets and reports on experiments, usually older reports that are not readily available online or in libraries. I do this as a last resort after exhausting all other methods. The process is highly targeted, sort of, et cetera, et cetera. So I call my problem the two-agency trap. Some agencies create technical documents and have the authority to release them, but these agencies often no longer have the documents. Another agency set up as the custodian has the documents, but allegedly does not have the authority to release them. The trap is that the originating agency says that they cannot release the documents because they do not have them, typically with language along the lines of, we searched our own records and don't have them. And then it goes on with some specifics, but basically it's like, how do you deal with the two agency trap? This reader is like extremely well informed and seems very good at filing FOIA. So I'm a little bit skeptical that I have advice that they haven't already tried, but I will talk a little bit about what has happened when I've done things like this. I used to file a lot of requests with NASA back when I was writing more about space, and just like, I don't know, I was interested in filing FOIAs with NASA for a while. And what would happen was I would get bounced between NASA Office of Inspector General, which is like an agency that oversees NASA, and NASA proper, and like different NASA agencies, and sometimes other agencies like NASA does a lot of partnerships with NOAA, for example, and other parts of the government. And I know this two agency trap that this reader is talking about very well. It's like you get sort of stuck in uh, administrative hell where you just like, they're just not giving you the documents. They say like, we have the documents, but we don't have the authority to get them. They're getting redacted by someone else, so on and so forth. Um, the way that I have like gotten around this is that I have started filing very similar requests with multiple agencies when I believe that multiple agencies might have the documents. Um, so in the NASA case, it's like I will very often file a request not just with NASA, but with like the specific part within NASA that I believe will have the documents, also with NOAA, also with NASA OIG, which I was just talking about. And I will like get the process started across every agency that I believe might have the documents. This also works really well on a state and local level too, which I have a lot more experience now doing state and local stuff. But it's like if the governor of Texas is doing something that involves like the Department of Health and Human Services or something, I will FOIA the governor of Texas for the emails or documents that I'm looking for, but I will also file pretty much the same request with the Department of Health and Human Services. And very often I will get like the governor's emails to that agency. Like you can capture them from both angles, more or less. And so that's kind of like one of the other really nice things about Muckrock is that you can clone a request. So you can go and say, this is like actually a good example. It's like we filed this request with the Office of the Governor in Utah, but then we also filed it with the Department of Health and Human Services, like a couple other agencies. But you can go in and you can clone it, and it's like here again, and then you can just be like, actually, I want to file this with Texas, and you can file like 50 FOIAs at once that all have the same language, and you can tweak the language if you need to. But more or less, it's like this is a real problem. The two agency trap is a real problem. I don't really know a way around it other than waiting a really long time for the agencies to like get their shit together and determine what they're willing to release to you. But I have found that FOIAing sort of like all of the agencies you think could plausibly be involved has worked better for me in the past because you kind of start the FOIA process with all of the agencies all at once versus you file with NASA and then like 6 months later they're like, actually you should have filed this with NOAA, and then you start then. It's like not really interested in that.
All I would add to that, and sorry if you touched on this, but yeah, sometimes I will send one to like DHS S&T, which is like the R&D part of DHS. It does a lot of location data stuff. And I'll also do one with like a part of Customs and Border or whatever. And like they'll get really pissed and be like, no, this is an S&T thing. So we're just like rerouting your request there. Then they think it's a duplicate. And it doesn't usually end in them like not doing the request, but like they'll let you know and they'll reply to you and like moan at you a little bit, but generally it works out.
Yeah. A lot of these where you see like awaiting acknowledgement or awaiting whatever, these are ones that I filed like years ago, and I'm not even following up on most of these at all because I've already gotten a lot of these documents that I wanted through another agency that is like related or close or whatever. And these are just like, well, that was a shot in the dark in the first place. I didn't really expect those documents anyway, or something like that. So yeah. Let's answer these like last couple and then wrap. Does that work? We've been going for a while, I guess.
Yeah, let's do these last ones and then we'll wrap it. One from Elizabeth. They say they're working on a story. Berlin Joint Task Force, Police Department, Liquor Board, other agencies. They contact a representative for the program. They claim there wasn't one, and there was more of a board made up of each of these groups. If I wanted to submit a FOIA request for their raid schedule for last quarter, how would I figure out who to actually submit to? That's a really hard one. It sounds like you would almost need to do like a FOIA first to then figure out where to send your actual FOIA, right? Maybe you could do meeting minutes and then or agendas, and then that will get a list of participants, and then maybe you could drill down to them, and that would give you like a specific person or something like that. I did something like that for Europol, where I found like or I think it was like who attended the Five Eyes law enforcement meeting, and I got names and agencies and that sort of thing. But I know what you mean, where like there are these organizations that aren't real organizations. It's like a title, but it's actually like 4 different entities, right? I think that's something you'd have to chip away at, basically. Yeah.
I mean, I would file with all of them, though. I would file with the police department, the liquor board, all of the above, all at once. You never know what's going to come back, but I do agree that it's like a complicated one where, yeah, very often like one good FOIA will lead to like other other ideas.
Yeah.
This also might be another thing where you can look at the like city council meetings where this was formed or whatever. I mean, I don't know the city, and I don't know whether this was like formed in secret, but you may be able to find sort of like the appropriation, like where they were given funds to do this and who is actually in charge of it by looking into it, like looking into these like relatively obscure city council documents and stuff like that.
Yeah. Is there any legal liability for agencies lying? No. Well, not from us, you know. Like, I guess if they straight up lied and then you had the funds and the resources for a lawsuit, then yes. But you know, not from us. Like the liability they're going to get from lying is when we catch them and we report it, you know. But that's not really in the FOIA itself, if you see what I mean, right? Jason, would you agree?
They do lie. I mean, it's like I think a lot of them don't, but I don't know that they necessarily lie, but I think that a lot of agencies know that FOIA exists, obviously, and they will do steps to avoid creating records.
Yeah.
One way that they do this is they'll have in-person meetings, or they will do things over the phone, or they'll do things on personal devices, so on and so forth. And it's like, unless you're working a beat really closely, like if you're writing about your city council, city government, like constantly, you might get a tip and figure out that this is the case. But often in the documents I get back, there's like references to like that call we had or that meeting we had, and you know, phone calls, unless they're recorded, are not, there's no record of them. So there's like some agencies are very good at purposefully not creating records when they don't want to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Last one. Is there a way / etiquette for calling an agency out? Sorry for all the questions, by the way. Don't be sorry. This is what this is here for, as a paid subscriber. It's all good. I would say that, you know, I'll call out an agency when they're saying like, oh, we can't find these records or these records don't exist. I will just politely but firmly spell out the reasons why I don't think that's the case. I'll point to evidence. I will provide citations. I'll provide external links, all of that sort of thing. Like, you don't have to be an actual lawyer. Like, you don't have to write like a legal document, like a memorandum or whatever, but you kind of do that little bit of a vibe. Like, you role play as a lawyer for 5 minutes, and that's sort of the tone I take. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but don't be afraid of like calling them out or pushing back. That's what this system is here for. I just wouldn't be like, I wouldn't be rude about it, you know. There's no, like, that's never been useful to me. What has been useful to me is being polite, well researched, and sometimes if you do build up a rapport, just being like nice, you know. They're sometimes doing their job as well. And I don't think this has come up before, but this may surprise people, but the agencies I have the best relationship with for FOIA is the US military, which is a crazy counterintuitive thing to say, but they seem to take it really, really seriously. And I've had discussions where they're like on the phone and sometimes an email, like, look, I really want to get these documents, but like this bit's classified or whatever. But they do actually want to work with you. So I would try to lean to that side if possible. Jason, any last thoughts on that?
Calling them up is really good. I've found that a lot of FOIA officers really want to help you. I imagine, FOIA officers are almost definitely underpaid and overworked. Like, we know that for a fact. That said, it's like a lot of them are assholes themselves. It's like some of them are very nice. Some of them are clearly like being obstructionist. And with the obstructionist ones, I am not rude, but I'm very firm. I'm like, I know that this is not, I know you have these documents. Like sometimes they'll say I don't have the documents, and then I'll be like, I know you have the documents because I've seen reference to the documents in a city council meeting or like blah, blah, blah. Like how can you possibly say that you don't have the documents? And very often I will like pretend that I'm a lawyer. I won't say that I'm a lawyer, but I will pretend that I'm a lawyer. An example of this is like the again, the Satanist temple, which again, like a kind of like frivolous FOIA, but like very instructive, is like this formal appeal is not rude, but it's very firm, and it like mentions specific codes and blah blah blah. And I will sometimes say like, hey, like I'm willing to get a lawyer involved. Whether that's actually true or not doesn't really matter, but it's shocking how often they suddenly find documents when you can cite like actual statutes and so on and so forth. And I've said this in previous FOIA forums. I'm going to say it again. This is the only thing I've ever found ChatGPT to be useful for, is me going in there and being like, what do these exemptions mean? What is the Iowa code? Please like help me write some sort of appeal. And I did that with ChatGPT in this case. I did rewrite almost the entire thing, but it helped me find like what the codes were and blah, 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 because a lot of states have FOIA laws that are buried in books somewhere. And it's like, I don't know how to find Arkansas's like exemption 17 very easily. And I don't know, I could probably do some Googling, but in this case, it's like, I don't super care what this says, as long as it is like saying like, hey, I want these documents for real. Like I really want them.
Yeah, we're not in front of a judge. Like it doesn't matter, It's fine. It's just flexing. I'll just take the last one. Can you involve oversight boards when they exist? I haven't done that. I just do everything through the appeals process and that sort of thing, basically. All right, let's wrap that there. This was an amazing session. I really, really, we all really, really appreciate you coming. It's great to see old faces and new faces. We'll do another one of these really soon. If you have any questions in the meantime, please just send them to us somehow, DMs or email or whatever, right? Once we stop recording this, it will start uploading to our platform, and my internet sucks, so it will take a while. But then we will put the archive up. We'll put it on a post on the website for paid members only. And then, as I mentioned, I'll explore like making a page on the site that just says FOIA forum or something with links to all the archives or whatever it is, right? And I'll try to figure that out. Our paywall's a little weird for that, I think, so I'll find a way. But other than that, thank you all so much for coming. Jason, anything else?
No, thank you.
Wow, I thought you ended the stream with that.
No, I'm always blown away by how great the questions are and how nice you all are to us. So thank you. We appreciate it, and we'll see you again soon.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. Bye-bye.